London, 1837. Thick fog rolled through the narrow streets while horse carriages rattled over wet stone roads. Shopkeepers opened wooden shutters before sunrise, and factory whistles screamed across the city. At only 18 years old, Queen Victoria stepped onto the throne of the British Empire. Few people believed the young queen would change history, but her reign would become one of the most powerful eras the world had ever seen. America watched Britain closely, because this small island nation controlled nearly a quarter of the planet. During Victoria's rule, science exploded, industry transformed, cities and society entered a completely new age. But beneath the elegance of royal palaces and grand parties, another world existed. Thousands of poor families lived in dark, crowded slums where disease spread quickly and children worked dangerous factory jobs for pennies. The Victorian era was a time of stunning progress and brutal hardship existing side by side. Steam engines powered giant machines that produced endless goods, while trains connected distant cities faster than ever before. For the first time, ordinary people could travel across the country in hours instead of days. Rich businessmen built fortunes from coal, iron, and textiles, while the working class struggled to survive exhausting shifts inside deafening factories. In the center of it all stood Queen Victoria herself. She was disciplined, serious, and deeply devoted to duty. After marrying Prince Albert, she transformed the image of the monarchy into one centered around family morality and tradition. Americans reading newspapers across the Atlantic became fascinated with British royal life, and Victorian fashion quickly influenced trends in the United States. Yet Britain's power extended far beyond Europe. British ships crossed oceans, carrying soldiers, merchants, and missionaries to distant colonies in India, Africa, and Asia. The empire grew larger every year, and many proudly claimed that the sun never set on British territory. But expansion also brought conflict, rebellion, and suffering to millions living under imperial rule. As London became the heart of global trade, inventors introduced life-changing creations like the telegraph, photography, and early electric technology. Writers such as Charles Dickens exposed the painful realities of poverty, while scientists like Charles Darwin challenged traditional beliefs about human existence. The Victorian world was filled with contradiction, wealth and misery, innovation and exploitation, hope and fear. By the end of Queen Victoria's reign, Britain stood at the peak of its global influence, but cracks had already begun to form. Beneath the surface, the empire appeared unstoppable, yet a new century was approaching, and it would bring challenges no one could imagine. By the 1840s, the Industrial Revolution had completely transformed Britain. Massive factories towered over cities, once filled with quiet neighborhoods and small workshops. Coal smoke darkened the skies from Manchester to Birmingham, while thousands of workers poured through factory gates before dawn every single day. America was beginning its own industrial growth, but Britain had become the center of the modern machine age. Steam power changed everything. Giant engines drove spinning machines that produced mountains of cloth faster than human hands ever could. Wealthy factory owners earned enormous fortunes, while poor laborers struggled through exhausting 14-hour shifts surrounded by deafening noise and dangerous equipment. Inside textile mills, even young children worked long hours tying broken threads beneath moving machinery. Many lost fingers, hands, or worse. Families often depended on every child bringing home wages just to survive. In crowded industrial cities, conditions became unbearable. Entire families lived inside tiny damp rooms packed closely together near polluted rivers and smoking factories. Disease spread rapidly through filthy water and overflowing sewage. Cholera outbreaks terrified entire neighborhoods, and life expectancy for the poor dropped sharply. Yet despite the suffering, millions continued flooding into cities, searching for work because the countryside could no longer provide enough opportunity. Railroads became the greatest symbol of Victorian progress. Steam locomotives thundered across Britain, connecting distant towns and transforming daily life forever. A trip that once took days by carriage could now be completed within hours. Americans followed Britain's railway boom with fascination and soon copied the same rapid expansion across the United States. Train stations became crowded centers of business travel and migration. New inventions arrived constantly. The telegraph allowed messages to travel almost instantly across long distances, changing communication forever. Newspapers spread information faster than ever before, and people became more connected to world events. For the first time, ordinary citizens could learn about wars, disasters, and political changes within days, instead of weeks. Yet many Victorians feared the speed of industrial progress. Traditional craftsmen lost jobs to machines, while small family businesses collapsed under pressure from giant factories. Writers and social reformers warned that Britain was sacrificing humanity for profit. Among them was Charles Dickens, whose stories revealed the cruelty faced by orphaned children, struggling workers, and the urban poor. His novels shocked readers in both Britain and America by exposing realities many wealthy citizens preferred to ignore. At the center of the empire, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert strongly supported science, industry, and innovation. Albert especially believed technology would shape a brighter future for humanity. Together, they promoted education, engineering, and modernization across Britain. But even as the nation celebrated progress, a growing divide separated rich and poor. Behind the grand architecture, elegant fashion, and royal ceremonies, millions of workers remained trapped in poverty while industrial leaders built unimaginable wealth. Victorian Britain was becoming the most powerful nation on earth, but the price of that power was paid by countless ordinary people hidden beneath the smoke of the factories. In 1851, Britain decided to show the world its power with an event unlike anything ever seen before. In the heart of London, a massive glass building rose inside Hyde Park. People called it the Crystal Palace. Constructed from iron and nearly 1,000,000 panes of glass, the enormous structure looked futuristic even to Victorians themselves. Crowds stared in disbelief as sunlight poured through the transparent walls, creating a shining monument to industry, science, and empire. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert proudly opened what became known as the Great Exhibition. It was the first true World's Fair, and millions of visitors traveled from across Europe and America to witness it. Inside the Crystal Palace, more than 100,000 objects were displayed, from giant steam engines to delicate jewelry, exotic goods, and advanced machinery. Britain wanted the world to understand one thing clearly. The British Empire stood at the center of human progress. Prince Albert played a crucial role in organizing the exhibition. Unlike many politicians, he believed technology and education could improve society and unite nations peacefully. The exhibition became his greatest achievement, and Queen Victoria later described the opening ceremony as one of the proudest moments of her life. Americans visiting London were amazed by the scale of British industry, and many returned home, inspired to expand factories, railroads, and engineering projects across the United States. Yet the exhibition revealed more than scientific progress. It also displayed the enormous reach of the empire. Goods arrived from India, Africa, Canada, Australia, and countless colonies controlled by Britain. Precious fabrics, spices, ivory, gold, and rare materials filled the halls of the Crystal Palace. To many Victorians, these displays symbolized national greatness, but behind the beauty stood the harsh reality of imperial domination. Millions of colonized people supplied wealth and resources while receiving little freedom in return. Outside the Crystal Palace, London remained deeply divided between wealth and poverty. Elegant aristocrats in silk clothing wandered through exhibitions, while poor children begged for coins on nearby streets. The contrast shocked foreign visitors. Britain appeared modern and unstoppable, yet vast numbers of its own citizens still lived in desperate conditions. During this same period, Queen Victoria became more than just a ruler. She became a global symbol of morality, family values, and discipline. Paintings, newspapers, and photographs spread her image across the empire. For the growing middle class, Victoria represented stability during a time of rapid change. Families copied royal traditions, and many Americans also admired the Queen's devotion to marriage and motherhood. Photography was another revolutionary invention transforming Victorian society. For the first time, ordinary people could preserve realistic images of themselves and loved ones. Portrait studios opened everywhere, and photographs connected distant families across oceans. News images slowly began changing how people understood war, politics, and world events. The Great Exhibition marked the peak of Victorian confidence. Britain believed its empire, industry, and technology would continue expanding forever. But beneath the celebration, dangerous tensions were already growing. Across the empire and within British society itself, the machine age had created incredible power, yet many people wondered whether humanity could truly control the forces it had unleashed. In the middle of the Victorian era, Britain faced one of the greatest tragedies in its history. Across the Irish countryside, fields of potatoes suddenly turned black and rotten. For millions of poor Irish families, potatoes were their main source of food and survival. When the crops failed year after year, beginning in 1845, hunger spread rapidly through villages and towns. The disaster became known as the Great Irish Famine. Desperate families watched children starve while disease swept through overcrowded shelters and filthy streets. Entire communities collapsed under the weight of starvation and poverty. During Queen Victoria's reign, Ireland was controlled by Britain, and many Irish people believed the government failed to provide enough help. Food continued leaving Ireland for export even while thousands died from hunger. British officials followed strict economic policies, and many argued the free market should solve the crisis naturally. To starving families, these arguments meant nothing. Anger toward British rule grew stronger with every passing year. The famine changed Ireland forever. More than 1 million people died and millions more fled their homeland, searching for survival. Ships packed with weak and starving passengers crossed the Atlantic Ocean toward America and Canada. Many of these overcrowded vessels became known as coffin ships because disease killed countless travelers before they even reached land. For the United States, the Irish migration would permanently transform American society. Cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago filled with Irish immigrants carrying memories of suffering and bitterness toward Britain. At first, many Americans treated the Irish with hostility and suspicion. Newspapers often portrayed them as poor, uneducated, and dangerous. Signs appeared outside businesses, saying no Irish need apply. Yet despite discrimination, Irish immigrants worked tirelessly building railroads, canals, factories, and entire neighborhoods. Over time, they became a major political and cultural force in America. Back in Britain, Queen Victoria donated money to famine relief and supported charitable efforts, but critics argued that monarchy and government did far too little. The tragedy exposed the darker side of the British Empire. While London celebrated wealth progress and global influence, millions within the empire suffered under poverty, colonial rule, and neglect. The famine also fueled Irish nationalism. Secret organizations demanding independence gained support, and anti-British anger spread across generations. Violence and rebellion would continue shaping relations between Britain and Ireland for decades to come. Meanwhile, Victorian newspapers carried heartbreaking images and stories from Ireland to readers across the world. For the first time, improved communication technology allowed distant tragedies to reach mass audiences quickly. Many people began questioning whether industrial progress and imperial power truly created a more moral society. The Victorian era often presented itself as an age of civilization and progress, yet the Irish famine revealed how fragile human life remained beneath the confidence of the empire. As Britain continued expanding its global influence, millions now understood that the shining image of Victorian greatness also carried shadows of suffering, loss, and injustice. As the Victorian era moved into the second half of the 19th century, Britain became obsessed with expansion and conquest. The British Empire stretched across continents, controlling territories in India, Africa, Asia, Canada, and the Pacific. Maps in Victorian classrooms often colored British lands in bright red, and children proudly learned that the empire covered nearly 1/4 of the earth. Politicians, newspapers, and military leaders claimed Britain had a duty to spread civilization, religion, and progress across the world. Many Americans watching from across the Atlantic admired Britain's global power, while others saw the empire as a warning about unchecked imperial ambition. India stood at the center of Britain's empire and provided enormous wealth through trade, resources, and taxation. British companies controlled vast industries while millions of Indians lived under foreign authority. In 1857, tensions finally exploded into violent rebellion. Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, turned against British officers after years of resentment, anger, and cultural conflict. The uprising spread rapidly across northern India as rebels attacked colonial outposts, and British families fled in terror. News of massacres shocked Britain, and newspapers demanded revenge. The conflict became one of the bloodiest crises of Queen Victoria's reign. British forces responded with brutal military force, crushing the rebellion town by town. Entire villages were destroyed and thousands of people died during the violence. After the rebellion ended, Britain dissolved the powerful East India Company and placed India directly under control of the Crown. Queen Victoria was later declared Empress of India, becoming the symbolic ruler of millions she would never meet. For many Victorians, the empire represented national pride and economic success, but critics argued imperialism relied on exploitation, violence, and racial superiority. Missionaries traveled across colonies attempting to spread Christianity and European customs, while local traditions were often ignored or suppressed. British factories depended heavily on resources from colonies, and global trade routes strengthened the nation's economy. London became the financial center of the world as ships carrying tea, cotton, spices, and precious materials arrived daily from across the empire. Victorian newspapers celebrated military victories, and adventurous explorers became celebrities. Men like David Livingstone traveled through Africa, mapping unknown regions for European audiences fascinated by distant lands. Yet exploration often opened the door for conquest and colonization. Across Africa, European powers competed aggressively for territory, dividing entire regions without considering the people already living there. Back in Britain, ordinary citizens followed imperial wars. Through newspapers, illustrations, and public speeches, patriotism grew stronger with every victory, and many believed the British Empire would last forever. But beneath the confidence, tensions continued rising. Colonized populations increasingly resisted foreign rule, while critics inside Britain questioned the morality of empire itself. The Victorian Age presented Britain as the world's greatest power, yet maintaining such enormous control required constant force, military expansion, and political domination. The empire brought wealth, glory, and influence to Britain, but for millions living under colonial rule, it also brought fear, inequality, and resistance that would shape the future of the modern world. By the 1860s, Victorian Britain was experiencing a revolution, not only in industry and empire, but also in science and ideas. For centuries, many people believed the world operated according to unchanging religious truths. Then in 1859, a quiet naturalist named Charles Darwin published a book that shocked Victorian society. The book was called On the Origin of Species, and it introduced the theory of evolution through natural selection. Darwin argued that all living creatures slowly changed over millions of years, adapting to survive in harsh environments. His ideas challenged traditional beliefs about creation and humanity's place in the universe. Across Britain, fierce debates erupted inside churches, universities, newspapers, and family homes. Some Victorians saw Darwin as a dangerous threat to religion, while others believed science was finally uncovering the hidden laws of nature. Americans also became fascinated by the controversy. As debates about evolution spread rapidly across the Atlantic, the Victorian era became an age where scientific discovery transformed everyday life faster than ever before. Inventors, engineers, and doctors introduced technologies that seemed almost magical to earlier generations. Telegraph cables connected continents, allowing messages to travel across oceans. Within minutes, railroads expanded deeper into cities and countryside, while steamships reduced travel times between Europe and America dramatically. For wealthy Victorians, the world suddenly felt smaller and more connected. Medicine also began advancing during this period. Doctors slowly improved surgical techniques, and hospitals became more organized. Scientists discovered that invisible germs spread disease, which changed how cities approached sanitation and public health. London built massive sewer systems after years of deadly cholera outbreaks polluted the river Thames and filled the capital with unbearable smells. These improvements saved countless lives and transformed urban living conditions. Yet, despite scientific progress, many Victorians remained deeply superstitious. Interest in ghosts, seances, and spiritualism exploded across Britain and America. Wealthy families gathered in dark rooms, attempting to communicate with the dead through mediums and mysterious rituals. Even respected intellectuals became fascinated by the possibility of life after death. The Victorian world balanced between scientific reason and fear of the unknown. Photography also changed how people understood reality. For the first time, families preserved detailed images of loved ones and famous figures. During the American Civil War and later conflicts, photographs revealed the horrifying realities of battle to ordinary citizens. Journalism became more powerful as newspapers reached millions of readers hungry for stories about science, crime, politics, and celebrity scandals. Queen Victoria herself became increasingly isolated after the sudden death of Prince Albert in 1861. Devastated by grief, she wore black clothing for the rest of her life and withdrew from many public appearances. Some citizens criticized the Queen for disappearing from public view, while others sympathized with her sorrow. Albert's death deeply affected the monarchy and transformed Victoria into a symbol of mourning duty and emotional restraint. As science and technology continued reshaping society, many Victorians believed humanity was entering a brilliant new age of progress. But rapid change also created anxiety, uncertainty, and fear about what the future might bring. During the later Victorian era, the streets of London became both symbols of progress and scenes of deep fear. The capital of the British Empire had grown into the largest city on earth, with more than 6 million residents packed into crowded neighborhoods divided sharply between wealth and poverty. In the elegant districts, wealthy families attended theaters, dined in luxurious restaurants, and traveled through brightly lit streets in horse-drawn carriages. But only a few miles away, another London existed, hidden beneath fog, smoke, and darkness. In the East End, thousands of poor workers, immigrants, and unemployed families struggled to survive inside overcrowded slums filled with crime, disease, and desperation. Victorian society became obsessed with morality, respectability, and social order, yet beneath the polished surface, fear constantly spread through newspapers and public imagination. Crime stories fascinated readers, and sensational journalism exploded during this period. No criminal terrified Victorians more than the mysterious killer known as Jack the Ripper. In 1888, several women were brutally murdered in the Whitechapel district of London. The killer was never caught, and panic swept through the city. Newspapers printed horrifying details daily, turning the murders into an international obsession. Americans followed the story closely, and for the first time modern media transformed a criminal investigation into worldwide entertainment. The legend of Jack the Ripper exposed Victorian anxieties about poverty, prostitution, violence, and the dangerous conditions of urban life. Police forces also changed during this era. London created one of the first organized modern police departments known as the Metropolitan Police. Officers patrolled the streets, attempting to maintain order in a city growing larger and more chaotic every year. Advances in detective work, photography, and forensic methods slowly transformed criminal investigations, though many crimes still remained unsolved. Meanwhile, social reformers fought to improve living conditions for the poor. Journalists and activists exposed horrifying realities inside factories, slums, and workhouses. Children often worked dangerous jobs, cleaning chimneys, selling newspapers, or laboring in factories for tiny wages. Reform laws eventually limited child labor, improved sanitation, and expanded education, but progress remained slow. Victorian families also lived under strict social expectations. Men were expected to appear disciplined, hardworking, and emotionally controlled, while women were encouraged to become devoted wives and mothers. Yet many women increasingly challenged these limitations. Female writers, teachers, nurses, and activists demanded greater rights and opportunities. Early movements for women's suffrage began, gaining support as campaigners argued women deserved the right to vote and participate fully in political life. Technology continued transforming daily existence. Electric lights slowly replaced gas lamps, while telephones began connecting homes and businesses. Department stores filled with fashionable goods attracted middle-class shoppers, eager to embrace modern consumer culture. To many Victorians, the future appeared exciting and unstoppable. Yet the contrast between wealth and misery remained impossible to ignore. Beneath the glowing streets and imperial confidence, millions still struggled with poverty, fear, and uncertainty in the heart of the greatest empire on earth. By the 1890s, the Victorian era was approaching its final years, yet Britain still stood as the most powerful nation on earth. London controlled global trade, finance, and naval power, while the empire stretched across distant continents. Massive steamships crossed oceans carrying goods, soldiers, and migrants between colonies and industrial cities. Telegraph cables connected governments and businesses faster than any civilization in history. To many Victorians, it seemed impossible that Britain could ever decline. But beneath the confidence, new global powers were beginning to rise. The United States and Germany rapidly expanded their industries, challenging British economic dominance for the first time. Factories in America produced enormous quantities of steel, oil, and machinery, while German scientists and engineers lead breakthroughs in chemistry and technology. Some British politicians quietly feared the empire was becoming too large to control. Competition between nations grew more dangerous each year. At the same time, the British Empire faced increasing resistance across its colonies. In Africa, British forces fought costly wars against local. One of the most controversial conflicts became the Boer War in South Africa, beginning in 1899. British troops battled Dutch settlers known as Boers over land, gold, and political control. The war shocked the public because it lasted far longer than expected and exposed serious weaknesses. Inside the British military, newspapers printed disturbing reports about concentration camps where thousands of civilians suffered from disease, starvation, and poor conditions. Critics argued the empire had sacrificed morality for power and profit. Meanwhile, inside Britain, social divisions continued deepening. Industrial workers demanded better wages, safer conditions, and shorter hours. Trade unions grew rapidly as laborers organized strikes against factory owners and wealthy corporations. Socialist ideas gained popularity among workers who believed the nation's enormous wealth should be shared more fairly. The Victorian image of endless prosperity no longer convinced everyone. Women also intensified their fight for political rights. Suffragists organized public meetings, protests, and campaigns demanding the right to vote. Many men dismissed the movement as dangerous or unnatural, but women increasingly refused to remain silent. Universities slowly opened opportunities for female students, while more women entered professions once reserved entirely for men. Queen Victoria herself remained a powerful symbol of stability throughout these changes. Elderly and respected across the world, she became known as the grandmother of Europe because her children and grandchildren married into royal families across the continent. Her image appeared on coins, newspapers, statues, and government buildings throughout the empire. Yet the Queen's long reign also masked growing uncertainty about the future. New inventions, such as automobiles, motion pictures, and early wireless communication, signaled the arrival of a completely different century. Victorian Britain had transformed the modern world through industry, science, and empire, but many now sensed the old order was beginning to crack. As the 19th century came to an end, people celebrated progress and imperial glory while unknowingly standing on the edge of wars, revolutions, and global conflicts that would soon change humanity forever. In January 1901, Queen Victoria died at the age of 81, ending one of the longest and most influential reigns in history. For more than 60 years, she had ruled over Britain during a period of massive industrial growth, imperial expansion, scientific discovery, and social transformation. Millions across the empire mourned her death, and newspapers around the world described the moment as the end of an entire age. In America, many people felt the same because Victorian Britain had shaped global culture, politics, technology, and economics. Throughout the 19th century, crowds filled the streets of London as black flags hung from buildings and church bells echoed through the city. Elderly citizens remembered the young queen who had taken the throne in 1837, while younger generations had never known another monarch. Victoria's funeral became one of the largest public ceremonies ever seen in Britain. Soldiers, diplomats, royals, and political leaders from across Europe marched through London in a display of imperial power and international influence. Yet beneath the ceremony, many people sensed uncertainty about the future. The world entering the 20th century looked very different from the one Victoria inherited. Decades earlier, automobiles now appeared on city streets, replacing horse-drawn carriages. Electric lights illuminated buildings, and telephones connected homes and businesses instantly. Motion pictures introduced entirely new forms of entertainment, while wireless communication began shrinking. The distance between continents, science and industry had transformed civilization at breathtaking speed during the Victorian era. But progress also created dangerous rivalries between powerful nations. Germany, the United States, and Japan emerged as major industrial and military powers challenging British dominance across the globe. Britain still controlled the largest empire on Earth yet. Maintaining such enormous territory became increasingly expensive and difficult. In many colonies, resistance movements demanded greater freedom and independence. From imperial rule, the confidence that once defined Victorian society slowly began fading. Social tensions inside Britain also continued growing. Industrial workers demanded political reform, better living conditions, and fair wages. Women intensified their campaigns for voting rights and equal opportunities. Poverty remained widespread despite decades of economic growth, and many citizens questioned whether the empire truly benefited ordinary people. Writers, artists, and intellectuals increasingly challenged traditional Victorian values about morality, class, and authority. The strict social codes that once shaped society no longer seemed permanent. Historians later described the Victorian era as an age of contradiction. It produced extraordinary inventions, railroads, global trade networks, and scientific breakthroughs, while also creating brutal factory conditions, imperial violence, and extreme inequality. Britain reached the height of its global power during Victoria's reign, but the empire's strength depended heavily on military force, colonial control, and industrial exploitation. As the 20th century began, many people believed humanity stood on the edge of an even brighter future, filled with technology, peace, and progress. Few could imagine that within only 13 years, Europe would descend into the First World War, destroying millions of lives and shattering the old Victorian world forever. The era of Queen Victoria had ended, but its influence continued shaping the modern world in ways people still recognize today. Even after Queen Victoria's death, the influence of the Victorian era remained deeply woven into British and American society. The early 20th century inherited not only the inventions and industries of the 19th century, but also its values, fears, and ambitions. Victorian ideas about morality, discipline, family, and social status continued, shaping everyday life long after the Queen herself was gone. Schools taught children strict rules about behavior, respect, and patriotism, while governments still celebrated imperial power and industrial progress as signs of national greatness. Yet beneath the surface, the modern world was changing rapidly. New forms of entertainment transformed popular culture. Motion pictures attracted huge crowds, and for the first time, ordinary people could watch dramatic stories come alive on screen. Music halls, theaters, and newspapers became central parts of urban life. Celebrities, actors, and public figures gained influence over society in ways never seen before. Americans especially embraced this new mass culture, and many trends soon spread across the Atlantic back to Britain. Fashion also changed dramatically as younger generations rejected some of the rigid customs of the Victorian age. Women wore lighter clothing and increasingly challenged expectations about marriage, work, and independence. Men became more interested in sports, leisure, and modern consumer culture. Department stores expanded across cities, selling products that symbolized wealth, status, and modern living. Advertising exploded during this period, convincing millions that happiness could be purchased through fashion, technology, and luxury goods. At the same time, the darker legacy of the Victorian era remained impossible to escape. Industrial cities still suffered from pollution, overcrowding, and poverty. Many factory workers lived in exhausting conditions despite decades of economic growth. In colonies across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, resistance against European empires intensified as people demanded self-rule and freedom from foreign domination. The same imperial systems built during Victoria's reign now faced growing anger and rebellion. Technology continued advancing at incredible speed. Airplanes, automobiles, and wireless radios transformed transportation and communication. Inventors promised a future filled with comfort, convenience, and endless progress. But military leaders also recognized that modern technology could create far deadlier wars than humanity had ever experienced before. European nations expanded armies and navies while competing aggressively for global influence. Alliances formed between powerful countries and political tensions increased every year. Many citizens remained optimistic, believing civilization had become too advanced for another major war. Yet beneath the confidence, nationalism, imperial rivalry, and economic competition pushed Europe toward disaster. Historians often describe the years before the First World War as the final shadow of the Victorian world. Society still carried the elegance, traditions, and imperial pride of the 19th century, while unknowingly approaching one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. The Victorian era had changed the world forever through industry, science, empire, and culture. It created modern cities, global communication systems, and technological innovation, but also deep inequality, colonial oppression, and dangerous international rivalries. The world entering the 20th century stood as both the greatest achievement and the greatest warning left behind by the age of Queen Victoria. When historians look back at the Victorian era, one of the most fascinating aspects is how deeply it transformed everyday life for ordinary people. Before Queen Victoria's reign, most families lived in small rural communities where life changed slowly across generations. By the end of the 19th century, millions lived in crowded industrial cities surrounded by railroads, factories, electric lights, and modern technology. The Victorian age completely reshaped how people worked, traveled, communicated, and even understood themselves. One of the biggest changes involved education. Earlier in the century, many poor children never attended school and worked instead in mines, factories, or farms. As industrial society expanded, Britain realized educated workers were necessary for business, government, and technological progress. Laws gradually introduced compulsory education, and literacy, RATES, increased dramatically. Newspapers, books, and magazines became affordable to ordinary families, creating a society more connected through information than ever before. American reformers closely followed Britain's educational expansion and adopted similar ideas in the United States. Reading also became one of the most popular forms of entertainment during the Victorian era. Writers such as Charles Dickens, Arthur Conan Doyle, and H. Wells gained enormous audiences through serialized stories printed in newspapers and magazines. Families gathered together to read the latest adventures, mysteries, and science fiction tales. Sherlock Holmes became one of the first truly global fictional characters, as readers across Britain and America eagerly followed his investigations through Victorian London. Meanwhile, H.G. Wells imagined terrifying futures involving alien invasions, time travel, and scientific disasters, revealing both excitement and fear about modern technology. Victorian fashion and social customs also shaped society in powerful ways. Wealthy women wore elaborate dresses, corsets, gloves, and hats, while men dressed in formal suits and carried walking canes or pocket watches. Etiquette became extremely important, especially among the growing middle class. Proper manners, speech, and appearance often determined social status and career opportunities. Yet strict expectations also created pressure and emotional restraint. Many Victorians hid personal struggles behind images of respectability and discipline. Religion remained central to daily life for millions. But scientific discoveries increasingly challenged traditional beliefs. Churches competed with new ideas about evolution, psychology, and social reform. Some people embraced modern science enthusiastically, while others feared society was abandoning morality and spiritual values. The Victorian era constantly balanced tradition against progress, creating tensions still visible in modern culture today. Sports and leisure activities also expanded rapidly. Football, baseball, boxing, and cycling attracted huge audiences, while public parks, museums, and seaside resorts offered new forms of recreation. For working families, railroads allowed ordinary citizens to travel for pleasure. For the first time in history, tourism became a growing industry, connecting distant regions and cultures. By the end of the Victorian age, the foundations of the modern world were firmly in place. Mass communication, urban living, consumer culture, public education, organized sports, and global entertainment all expanded dramatically during these years. The era left behind incredible achievements and painful inequalities, but its influence continued shaping everyday life long after Queen Victoria herself had passed into history. One of the most powerful forces during the Victorian era was the rise of the British middle class. Before industrialization, society was dominated mainly by aristocrats and poor laborers, but factories, trade, banking, and engineering created entirely new opportunities for ordinary people. Business owners, lawyers, doctors, teachers, and merchants began building comfortable lives that earlier generations could never imagine. This growing middle class became the heart of Victorian culture, shaping politics, fashion, education, and family life across Britain, and even influencing America. Victorian homes reflected these changing values. Families filled houses with heavy furniture, books, clocks, photographs, and decorative objects meant to display respectability and success. The home became a symbol of morality, discipline, and stability in a rapidly changing world. Women were often expected to manage the household and raise children, while men worked outside, earning income for the family. Many Victorians believed strong family structure was essential for maintaining social order during industrial expansion. At the same time, class divisions remained extremely strict. Wealthy citizens lived in elegant neighborhoods with servants and private education, while poor workers crowded into dangerous slums near factories and polluted rivers. Social mobility increased during the Victorian era, but escaping poverty remained difficult for millions. Writers and reformers repeatedly warned that industrial society created enormous wealth for some while trapping others in misery. The Victorian obsession with manners and reputation also shaped personal relationships. Public behavior was carefully controlled, and emotional restraint was considered a sign of intelligence and respectability. Courtship followed strict social rules, and scandals could destroy entire families. Yet behind closed doors, many Victorians struggled with loneliness, pressure, and anxiety caused by these expectations. Technology slowly changed domestic life as well. Gaslighting heated homes more effectively while sewing. Machines improved clothing production. Telephones eventually connected wealthy households. And modern plumbing transformed sanitation in cities. These inventions made life more comfortable for the middle and upper classes, though poor communities often waited decades for similar improvements. Consumer culture expanded rapidly during this period. Large department stores sold fashionable clothing, furniture, cosmetics, and imported luxury goods from across the empire. Advertising encouraged people to purchase products as symbols of success and modern identity. Americans visiting Britain admired these new shopping centers, and similar businesses soon appeared throughout the United States. Meanwhile, servants remained essential to Victorian households. Millions of women worked as cooks, maids, nannies, and cleaners for wealthier families. Domestic service became one of the few employment opportunities available for poor women, though the work was exhausting and highly controlled. By the end of the 19th century, Victorian society had created the foundations of modern middle-class life. Ideas about career success, home ownership, education, family values, and consumer culture all expanded dramatically during these years. Yet the same society also preserved sharp inequality, rigid gender roles, and intense pressure to appear respectable at all times. The Victorian dream of progress brought comfort and opportunity to many people, but it also demanded conformity, discipline, and sacrifice from nearly everyone living within its world. One of the darkest and most controversial sides of the Victorian era was child labor. During the Industrial Revolution, millions of children worked long hours inside factories, mines, and dangerous workshops. Poor families often depended on every family member earning money just to survive. Children as young as 5 years old cleaned factory machines, crawled through narrow coal tunnels, and carried heavy loads for exhausting shifts that sometimes lasted more than 12 hours a day. Factory owners preferred hiring children because they were cheap, easy to control, and small enough to fit into dangerous spaces adults could not enter. Injuries were common, and many children lost fingers, limbs, or even their lives while working around powerful industrial machines. In coal mines, conditions became even more horrifying. Young boys and girls pulled heavy carts through dark underground tunnels filled with dust, heat, and poisonous air. Many never attended school and grew up trapped in poverty with little hope of escape. Victorian society often celebrated industry, progress, and economic growth, yet the suffering of working children revealed the brutal human cost behind industrial success. Reports about child labor shocked many middle-class citizens who had never seen factory life themselves. Journalists, doctors, and social reformers began exposing the terrible conditions hidden inside industrial cities. Writers such as Charles Dickens used novels to reveal the struggles of poor children abandoned by society. His stories became hugely popular in both Britain and America, and helped turn public opinion against the worst abuses of child labor. Gradually, the government introduced reform laws limiting working hours and preventing very young children from laboring in factories and mines. Education laws also expanded during the 19th century, allowing more children to attend school instead of entering dangerous jobs at an early age. These reforms slowly improved conditions, but enforcement remained weak for many years, especially in poor industrial areas. At the same time, Victorian children from wealthy families lived completely different lives. Rich boys attended private schools preparing for careers in politics, business, or the military, while girls learned music, literature, and social etiquette inside comfortable homes. The contrast between rich and poor childhoods became one of the clearest examples of Victorian inequality. Religion and morality played major roles in reform movements. Many Victorians believed society had a responsibility to protect innocent children and improve living conditions for the poor. Charities, orphanages, and public schools expanded across Britain, though poverty still remained widespread. The issue of child labor also influenced America, where factories increasingly employed children during industrial expansion. Reformers in the United States later used Britain as both a warning and an example while fighting for labor protections. By the end of the Victorian era, child labor had decreased significantly compared to earlier decades, but millions of young workers had already sacrificed their health, education, and futures to fuel the growth of the industrial world. Their hidden labor helped build the wealth and power that made Victorian Britain the strongest empire on earth. As the Victorian era progressed, the role of women slowly began changing in ways that would transform modern society forever. During the early 19th century, most women in Britain had very limited rights and opportunities. Married women often could not control property, money, or legal decisions independently from their husbands. Society expected women to remain focused on marriage, motherhood, religion, and domestic life, while men dominated politics, business, science, and higher education. Queen Victoria herself, surprisingly, believed that politics was mainly a male responsibility, even though she ruled the largest empire on earth. Yet despite these restrictions, Victorian women gradually pushed against the boundaries placed around them. Industrialization created new jobs in factories, offices, shops, and schools, allowing more women to earn wages outside the home. Teaching, nursing, and clerical work became common professions for middle-class women seeking independence and education. Florence Nightingale became an international symbol of modern nursing after improving medical care during the Crimean War. Her work inspired thousands of women in both Britain and America to enter healthcare professions previously controlled almost entirely by men. Education also expanded dramatically for women during the Victorian period. New schools, colleges, and universities slowly opened opportunities once reserved only for wealthy men. Female writers gained large audiences, and women increasingly participated in journalism, literature, and social reform movements. Authors such as the Brontë sisters challenged traditional ideas about female intelligence, ambition, and independence through novels that shocked many conservative readers. At the same time, working-class women often faced brutal conditions. Inside factories, textile mills, and domestic service jobs, many worked extremely long hours for low wages, while also caring for children and households. Poverty forced countless women into dangerous situations, including prostitution, which became a major social issue in Victorian cities. Society frequently judged poor women harshly, while ignoring the economic conditions, trapping them in desperation. By the late 19th century, organized movements demanding women's rights grew stronger across Britain and America. Suffragists campaigned for education, property rights, legal protections, and most importantly, the right to vote. Public meetings, protests, petitions, and speeches challenged the belief that politics belonged only to men. Many opponents claimed giving women political power would destroy family life and social order. Yet activists refused to remain silent. Victorian newspapers often mocked or criticized these women, but the movement continued expanding every year. Fashion itself became part of the struggle for freedom. Heavy dresses, tight corsets, and restrictive clothing symbolized social expectations controlling women's bodies and behavior. Some reformers promoted simpler, practical clothing, allowing women greater mobility and independence. By the end of the Victorian era, society had not achieved equality for women, but major changes had already begun. Women entered professions, universities, and political movements in growing numbers, challenging traditions that had existed for centuries. The Victorian world still remained deeply unequal, yet the courage of these early reformers laid the foundation for future generations fighting for equal rights, freedom, and opportunity throughout the modern world. The Victorian era remains one of the most fascinating periods in human history because it shaped the modern world in ways we still see today. Between 1837 and 1901, Britain transformed from a traditional kingdom into the most powerful industrial empire on earth. Steam engines, factories, railroads, electricity, photography, telegraphs, and global trade changed how people lived, worked, traveled, and communicated forever. The world became faster, larger, and more connected than any generation before could have imagined. Yet behind the progress stood millions of ordinary people whose lives were filled with struggle, sacrifice, and survival. Poor workers spent endless hours inside dangerous factories, while children labored in mines and textile mills. Families crowded into polluted industrial cities where disease, poverty, and crime spread through narrow streets hidden beneath the glory of empire. At the same time, scientists, inventors, writers, and reformers pushed society toward incredible discoveries and social change. Charles Darwin challenged humanity's understanding of life itself, while authors like Charles Dickens exposed the suffering hidden behind Victorian wealth. Women slowly fought for education, independence, and political rights, while workers demanded fair wages and safer conditions. Across the British Empire, millions lived under colonial rule as Britain expanded its influence across India, Africa, and Asia. Some viewed the empire as a symbol of civilization and progress, while others saw exploitation, violence, and injustice. The Victorian age was filled with contradiction. It created breathtaking innovation and terrible inequality at the same time. Queen Victoria herself became a symbol of stability, tradition, and imperial power during one of the most rapidly changing eras in history. Even after her death, the world continued living in the shadow of the Victorian era. Modern cities' public education, consumer culture, mass media, global communication, and industrial technology all grew from the foundations built during those decades. But the tensions created by empire, industrialization, and competition between nations also pushed the world closer to the devastating wars of the 20th century. The Victorian era was not simply a story about kings, queens, and palaces. It was a story about workers, inventors, immigrants, soldiers, children, reformers, explorers, and ordinary families trying to survive in a world changing faster than ever before. Their struggles, fears, dreams, and achievements shaped the modern age we live in today. Thank you for watching this journey through the Victorian era and the incredible stories that defined it. If you enjoyed these historical stories and want to explore more forgotten events, dark mysteries, and fascinating moments from history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next adventure into the past,